Welcome everyone. On behalf of Indian Diaspora of Australia, I extend a very warm welcome to you all. Besides some first-hand accounts of the victims and those who are in the thick of it, we have with us today a well-known panel of speakers who will share their thought with us. In no particular order, can I please ask you all to join me in welcoming Aditya Koul, senior journalist and anchor from India. Ashoke Pandit, Indian filmmaker and social activist from Mumbai, India. Manu Kajuriya, commentator, Dogra activist from Voice of Dogra in UK. Sunanda Vasisth, political commentator from USA. Sushil Pandit, social activist and author from India. And also we have His Excellency Shri Gitesh Sharma, the High Commissioner of India in Australia, who has kindly agreed to be here and share his thought with us today. This program, which we are commemorating today, is the 31st anniversary of the day when our Kashmiri Hindus and brothers were forced to flee the land of Kashmir. The price of integration that these people have paid is immense. It's the same pain that millions of people have suffered when India got partitioned. We are here to support these people through the process they have gone through. India has changed a lot since. Article 370 has been abrogated, 35A has been changed. So we are here to change what has been done wrong in past. On that note, I would like to welcome Dr. Yadu Singh to take proceeding from here further. Thank you, Dr. Yadu Singh ji.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you very much. And just to move the program in a very speedy way, I am going to invite my colleague Bimal Koul from Perth, he's part of the committee, to actually tell us about the organizers and also briefly about the Kashmiri Hindu exodus and genocide matter. Bimal, please.
Namaskar, Mara. Good morning, good afternoon to all. My name is Bimal Koul, an exiled Pandit now living in Perth. I would like to introduce the event organizers. Along with me are Mr. Ashutosh Raina from KPA Brisbane, Mr. Prashant Singh from FIAN, Dr. Yadu Singh from FIAN, Mr. Amit Jadon from FICV, Ms. Sonal Bhushan from Voice of Dogras, and Mr. Sudhir Raina from KPA NSW. For this event, our media partners are Mr. Rajesh Sharma from Indus Age and Mr. Rakesh Ganju from Lotus World. Before we hear from our esteemed guests, today I will briefly like to touch upon the journey of Kashmiri people. This is how we remembered Kashmir. These memories are strongly etched in our hearts. We as Kashmiri Pandits have always loved and cherished our motherland as a paradise on earth. With verdant valleys and ever-charming lakes, the land that was named after Rishi Kashyap, the only community that has been 100% literate for centuries. And that's how Kashmiri Hindus got the title of Pandits in Kashmir for intellectual knowledge they possessed. A valley that was vibrant and happening. And after 31 years in Exodus, this is how we remember Kashmir now, a radiant image that's distant and slowly fading away. With a deluge of weapons and support from neighboring country, suddenly mosques started blurring out Raliv Galiv Yat Saliv, meaning convert, die or leave Kashmir without your women folks. This started with many targeted killings and Pandits had to flee for their lives as people were raped, brutally murdered and houses were put on fire. Valleys started burning with no protection from security forces as all were caught either unaware or colluded with the extremists. Over 400,000 people had to evict their motherland in search of safety to save their lives. With no place to live for Kashmiri Hindus in the valley, they were forced to live in makeshift camps in Jammu to save their lives with no shelter and nothing more than what they could lay their hands on before leaving their homes and motherland. before living in a place called heaven on earth, had to face all the hardship none had ever imagined. A land full of flowing rivers of fresh water, old people had to fetch drinking water from distances, live in cold winter with minimals, and come summer of Jammu, where the temperature soared above 40 degrees, Kashmiri migrants had to face the harsh reality they were never exposed to. There were many hundred deaths due to heat stroke and lack of medical assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, this forced exodus is called religious and ethnic cleansing of Hindus from Kashmir Valley because we were a minority community, a community that's scattered all over and has become invisible in its own own land. Thank you all on this sad note.
Thank you very much, Vimal. Yes, we are sad and we show our solidarity with you and everybody else from Kashmiri Hindu community. Now, that takes us to hearing from the victims. There have been more than 400,000 people who have been forced to flee from Kashmir Valley. And the first person who had first-hand experience is a medical doctor, Dr. Sushma Shala, whose father was killed. And Dr. Shala would be introduced by my colleague from Brisbane, Mr. Ash Rana, Ashutosh Rana. Ashutosh.
Thanks, Dr. Yadu Singh ji, for giving me the opportunity to introduce Dr. Sushma Shala. Dr. Sushma Shala Koul is the daughter of late martyr Mr. Chunilal Shala. The turmoil of 1990 not only uprooted her family, but also snatched the most loved person in her life, which was her father. She is a gynecologist by profession and is presently based in Jammu. Her fields of interest are working with NGOs who are providing education to needy children, particularly the girls.
Namaskar to all of you. I'm Dr. Sushma Shala. As already told by Mr. Ashutosh that I lost my father in this turmoil, who was working as who was deputed to CID, and he was working in the police department and was working in the border district of Kupwara. And militancy had just started, and he was passing on the information to the government regarding the passage of boys from this side of the border to Pakistan for arms trade. Though he had got threatening letters from Hizbul Mujahideen, but the family never had an idea about this. He was kidnapped while coming back home on 1st of May. He was basically dragged from the bus when his own PSO identified him. And he was taken to an interrogation center located in Kupwara, interrogation center of the terrorists. He was taken there and he was tortured for 4 to 5 hours when he was in their captivity. Tortured to the extent that his nails were plucked out, his teeth were pulled, his body was marked with cigarette butts, and his joints were broken. Then he was dragged out of that hut in the middle of the fields where the interrogation center was based, and they tried to hang him from the tree. And while everything was happening, the local population of that area had assembled there to witness his torture and killing. And nobody from that crowd came forward to save him. And eventually, when they could not hang him, they killed him from point blank range. They shot him from point blank range and threw the body there. The family was waiting at home for him to return back because we were supposed to leave for Jammu the next day. While the body was there, the body was picked up on 2nd morning, 2nd May 1990. The body was lifted up and taken to the police station. But irony is that everybody refused to identify him. So much was the terror. Even the people who had worked with him, they did not recognize him. Then a Kashmiri Hindu constable who had worked under him, he recognized the body and a message was sent to our place. And then my uncle went to identify the body, and on 3rd we got the body. Even after his killing, on 3rd itself, when he was cremated in the night, in spite of getting the police protection by that time, a stone which was wrapped on a paper which was wrapped on a stone was thrown into our home, threatening that we have killed him, now we'll kill the family and take the daughter.
सब ऑर्गेनाइज हो गया सब कुछ के लिए
So, and at that time also, in spite of the security, so much was the morale of the terrorists was so high that they did not even get scared by the amount of security we were having. After this happened, then Jagmohan, because he was the governor and he knew my father well. In fact, he has written about my father in his book, The Frozen Turbulence in Kashmir. So he made it a point that we are shifted back to Jammu under full security, and we came to Jammu on 5th, and till now, till this date, we have not gone to Kashmir. After I mean to say, when I because it was a sort of such a big mental trauma to us, and we were small kids. I was just a teenager when my brother was just 5 years old that time. So first we had to look after how we will live now. Though my mother was working already, so we never faced the financial stress, but the mental trauma of growing up without a father was too much. Now I have started pursuing his case, and the problem is that we have just got an FIR number and we don't know anything what has moved in this case. In fact, nothing has happened in this case. We don't even know who has killed him. I wrote a letter to National Human Rights Commission also regarding this, but they refused to entertain my letter, saying that's already 30-year-old case and we don't entertain such old cases. So I am working on it. I am just RTI has been filed, and hopefully I may file a case in the court also, that at least we want a respectable end closure to this case, so that my mother, who's at the fag end of her life, has at this thing that whosoever killed her husband is booked for his murder. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Shalla. We are sad and sorry that your family had to go through what should have never happened. Not only your family, but many families, obviously, in Kashmir Valley, leading to the exodus and exiling of 400,000, more than that number. Now, with this, I'm going to now ask next person who actually had been in the thick of the situation in Kashmir Valley. He's a retired colonel, and he had been posted in Kashmir for quite a while. And his name is Colonel retired Mool Bhargava, who's from Perth. And he would be introduced by my colleague from Perth, Mr. Rajesh Koul. Rajesh Bhai.
Colonel Mool Bhargava is a graduate in Economics Honours from Delhi University and postgraduate in Business Management. He served in Indian Army for about 23 years, during which he extensively served in anti-terrorist operations in Kashmir, Punjab and Assam. Now he lives in Perth and actively writes and speaks on national and international and geostrategical matters. He is Secretary of Hindu Council of Australia, WA. Please welcome Mool Bhargava.
Thank you, Anish Paulji. Namaskar to everyone, and I'm very honored to be part of this memory day for our Kashmiri Hindu friends. As Dr. Milind Sathya rightly told, the word Kashmiri Pandit was used deliberately by some media, maybe your our own people also, to keep it isolated from Hindus in general. And I want to thank today the Kashmiri community, Kashmiri Hindu community, for organizing such events. And it is very important. If we see in the last 200, 300 years of Indian history, Kashmiri Hindus are not the only one who have been displaced from their locations. It happened to the Bengali Hindus in Dhaka and Chile. It happened to Sindhi Hindus in Karachi. It happens to Punjabi Hindus in Lahore and Islamabad. And it has happened in many other places. It is happening within India. But today, you don't hear any of those communities showing any willingness to even call those places their land or a wish to go back. So that way, the Kashmiri community is absolutely doing a wonderful job for keeping this hope alive, for keeping this fire alive, that Kashmir is our motherland and we will be there sometime. And yes, we will be there. There's no doubt about that. Now, since I am from the military background, so I would just like to bring in the military angle from this issue, but in a very different manner. You know, most of us, or generally Indians, think that Indian Army is kind of a magic force. Indian Army is a professional army of 100 million people, almost a million professional combatants. But The same army which sliced Pakistan into two pieces in 1971 could not defend its own people in its own territory in 1989. What changed? What happened? It is because the army or any organization of a country is like a weapon. The army especially is a weapon. But how and where it fires depends on the person who is holding it. The hands which are holding it, what direction do they give and how powerful and strong those hands are. In 1947, we have seen this. Indian Army was same, but because of their decision making at some level, they could not intervene in time. When they did a wonderful job. And then again, they were prevented. Otherwise, Kashmir would have been very different today. Similarly, as I told you, in 1962, we lost. 71, we had a strong direction and a strong hand to hold the army. We did wonders. We created a nation in 15 days. And in 90, again, we were helpless. Our own brothers, sisters were thrown out, killed, raped in Kashmir, and we just kept watching because people sitting in Delhi, the power from where it flows at how army will be used was not interested in that. And somehow, that is why I'm saying in democracy we have the choice. And this choice should be exercised by Hindus as a whole. Because aggressive cultures will take you over slowly and surely. And they are doing it in all parts of India, as they have done in East Bengal, as they have done in Pakistan, as they have done in other Kashmir and maybe in some other states in India also. So nobody should think that this has happened to Kashmiri, so it won't happen to us. Same thing was thought by some people in Lahore in 1945-46, or by some Sindhis or some Hindus in Dhaka and Chilhat. They were thrown out. So this issue concerns all of us, and we have to make sure that the fall which we had in the last 400, 500 years, the course correction is done now through democratic means. And we have, luckily today, a force, if supported properly, they can change this direction which we have been going in last so many years. But it is very essential for all of us to understand that these directions changing take decades. In last 5-6 years, we have seen some changes. This dismantling of that separatism started with the dismantling of the constitutional provisions, which was protecting that separatism. Article 370 was thrown out. Then thereafter, that political ecosystem which was supporting that separatism was put into their place. Though there was a lot of noise in hearing murder of democracy when some pampas dynasts were put into a guest house. That is not murder of democracy. If the democracy in Kashmir is actually being murdered, but by the terrorists. In last 3 years, more than 200 ground level democratic workers from various political parties, sarpanches, have been murdered. And they were Hindus and Muslims equally, So, who is killing democracy? It is not other way around that what narrative is being created. So, we have to see to this that the change of direction which has started in 5-6 years, last 3-4 years, rather, I would say maybe in the second tenure itself of the Modi government, should continue for next few decades. So that political system having been dismantled, now last month, or I think beginning of this month, another ecosystem, I would say, not political, which was productive of that separatism and which actually is the most powerful organ of any government, was the bureaucracy, has been also dismantled. I'm sure all of us know now that the bureaucracy in Kashmir now has been converted into union territory cadre. That means some of very corrupt and very, I would say, wild kind of bureaucrats sitting in Kashmir will now be going to Mizoram, to Manipur, or maybe to Puducherry, and they will realize how vast and how powerful India is. And some good bureaucrats from other states will go to Kashmir and make changes on the ground. And how is that happening? It is happening through only one mantra in democracy. Make the hand strong sitting in Delhi who can change the direction to the direction we want. And that cannot be done alone by the Kashmiri Hindu community. It has to be done by everyone from Kashmir to Kanyakumari to Kutch to Koul. If we just understand this, and if other Hindus who've been displaced from Sindh or from Punjab or from Bengal also start the same kind of movement, same kind of dream, I'm sure next 1 decade or so, the narrative world over will change. Let people know that Hindus have not only been displaced from Kashmir, they have been displaced from other parts of erstwhile India. And Kashmiri Hindus are showing way to all those communities that they should come forward and start at least remembering and telling their children that their homeland lies there. This message again, thank you everyone for giving me a chance to speak, especially the my Kashmiri friends and who are keeping this hope alive. Thank you very much and all the best.
Thank you, Colonel, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Bhargava. Thank you very much. Obviously, you have a lot of experience about this particular subject. Now, moving on, the next speaker is our own part of the family, the Indians in Australia. He's the head of the family of Indians in Australia. He represents the government of India as the High Commissioner of India in Australia. And he has been very kind to find time and come to this meeting and give his perspective, his words for this particular subject. So with this, I am now inviting His Excellency Sri Gitesh Sharma, the High Commissioner of India in Australia. High Commissioner.
Thank you, Dr. Yadu Singh, for the introduction and the opportunity to participate. I really wanted to be in listening mode and absorb all the various sentiments being expressed, the individual harrowing experiences, the human tragedy that is Kashmir. It was really sad to hear the first few speakers, and I was definitely very, very moved. And so I'm really not intending to speak at length and more to be in listening mode. But if I may say something, that being in Australia, one notices growing Indian diaspora, and this is common to several other countries, several other Western democracies or Westernized democracies, where Indian diaspora has done well for itself. They have earned respect for themselves as professionals, as law-abiding citizens, and participating in democratic exercises. At the same time, the world around us is not the same. When I was much younger in service, and now it's a completely different ecosystem environment in which we operate. There's a world of social media, there's a world of technology, there's a world of instant messaging, even the fact that we are sitting in different places and today able to converse on this very, very sad theme. So what we find is that even if we are not active, others are active, and others are extremely proactive in conveying their side of the story and trying very much to influence democratic processes in some of these countries, you could say Australia, United States, UK, some of Canada. So the narrative is very, very important, and it often emanates from the work of the diaspora. Now, when you say diaspora, it is general, not unfortunately, my own experiences. Many Indians themselves are not fully, conversant about the situation, the history of Jammu and Kashmir, the way they should have understood. So I think an exercise like this has tremendous importance and relevance, particularly at this point of time. Indians are always respected as wherever they are globally for being law-abiding citizens. But even in that, it is possible for you to convey the right picture to those who matter. The political, processes, they would depend very much on your inputs. Otherwise, that balance is missing. Sometimes you find that countries which are not well disposed towards India and have no other agenda, simple one-point agenda, that is to pull down India, that they keep repeating something, and this is picked up by political leaders at all levels, and that becomes the dominant narrative. So that's why I'm very, very appreciative that something like this is been initiated and is being taken forward. So really, it would not be enough, in my opinion, to merely put together all these human stories, which are definitely very, very important, but also to ponder that how exactly, taking into account that we are respected as Indians because of identity, uh, how we would be able to convey to the political processes, to use the social media to convey to the media what is the true story of Jammu and Kashmir. I think that's something as a practical outcome. If something like that emerges, then I think this kind of gathering, it would have done its work and it would have met its objective. So you would have to go back to your drawing boards and say that have we done enough in conveying this narrative to the media through and use the technologies that are available, the social media. Have we been quick on our feet? Have we been thinking on our feet? Have we been conveying the right, message across? Is there something we can do better? So that's really my humble request and expectation. But seeing, the those who have had hands-on experience, unfortunate experiences, and some are very young and they are talking of their memories of their having lost their loved ones. So it is cross-cutting across the generations. So I would really look forward to that. That if there is a very well-oiled strategy, well-oiled effort from now on to convey the right picture to the world, to the community where we are located, wherever in the world, and to our interlocutors. I think we would have done a tremendous job. So with that, I would really appreciate the organizers, Dr. Yadu Singh. I think some of the familiar names I saw, Mr. Prashant, Prakash Mehta also I saw. Several friends, I don't want to really go down that list, but each one of you is a friend. Each one of you has, Kashmiri, as, linked with India. We are very proud of you, greatly respect you, and have huge expectations from you. I would only say my best wishes for the excellent work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for finding time and speaking to us about your perspective. Thank you. We are grateful that you found time on Sunday. Now, after this, moving along, I am going to ask one of our colleagues who is part of the organizing committee, and his name is Sudhir Raina. He's from Sydney. He's my colleague from Kashmiri group in New South Wales. He also has some experience as a victim from this tragedy. Sudhir Bhai, you can summarize, you can tell us in brief moments about your experience.
Yeah, namaskar again, and thank you, Yaduji, for this opportunity. In some way or form, we Kashmiris who were there and who were connected with the people there are all victims. And in some form or other, we were all affected and we still carry those scars. And we actually have internalized that trauma and are struggling to move on, yet looking forward. Anyway, I'm Sudhir Raina. Just to introduce myself again, I was in Srinagar on the night of the 19th of January 1990, precisely Hyderpura in Srinagar, to be very exact. I say that name because nowadays I understand it is a seat of what you call the emerging rebels and all the rebel leaders and the elite live around that place. It was on the 19th of January. It was a cold but a likable cold sort of thing, typical Kashmiri night. But suddenly at about 9 p.m., the chill was so severe enough to send a spasm down my spine. This was not a chill that we in Sydney we see when the southerlies come. This was actually a spine-breaking chill. Tension and fear and terror was everywhere in the atmosphere. Of course, this was a culmination of the constant whipping up of passion, of anger against India that had been happening all along. The public address systems atop the minarets of the local mosques were in uniform sync, transmitting pre-recorded messages that, if every one of us understood, would terrorize our souls. One particular message that comes to mind, and I'm sure some of you do understand this, will understand the meaning, was Jago Jago Subah Hui. Jago Jago Subah Hui. रूस ने बाजी हारी है, हिंद को लर्जा तारी है, अब कश्मीर की बारी है. I asked my father, what does Larza Tari mean? He said, Larza Tari means it is terrified and it is wetting its pants. To summarize that exactly was the condition, the Indian state, the state that I used to look up and see and feel pride of the Indian might of the Indian state. That state was seen as wetting its pants. Now, this was a time of madness. We did not know when our houses would be attacked. I saw my father dial that old telephone which had those numbers that used to be turned around. I saw his trembling hands call somebody and say, what is this happening? The man on the other side was his colleague, who was relieved to hear from somebody but had his own harrowing tale to say. He said, his name was Dr. Shala again, sorry. And he said, I'm about to give some poison to my daughters, marriageable age daughters, because I don't know what to do next. My father dropped the phone and said to us, we have to leave. I asked my mom, what is that we have in the house? Something that we can carry along. And she quickly produced something in her hands, tied in a piece of cloth, some papers. I don't know what those papers were. And I think there was some gold jewelry in it. Because I was just 24 years old, thinking I was a grown-up man, I thought I was the most who could do the thinking. And I just went downstairs, started digging a hole to bury this up, thinking that someday we might come and take it back. Anyway, it's a long story, but that day we somehow collected our senses and we tried to knock the doors of our neighbors, very well-to-do neighbors who did not want to hear from us. But anyway, next day, the morning of January 20, we left Kashmir for good.
Thank you, Sudhir bhai. Thank you. Sorry, the message and the narratives you have given us is painful. It makes us upset, and our solidarity and our feelings are with you and everybody else who was put to this situation in Kashmir Valley. So now it is, of course, my pleasure to introduce, rather invite our friend from Indian media, prominent Indian media gentleman. His name is Mr. Aditya Koul. He is an independent journalist based in New Delhi, India, with over a decade-long experience in covering conflict, foreign policy, and internal security. Aditya, in his previous role, he was the editor of strategic affairs and internal security at Business Television India, BTVI, where he anchored his primetime news debate show. He was earlier the senior associate editor at Republic TV, where he primarily covered foreign and strategic affairs and national security related matters. Previously, he also worked as principal correspondent with Times Now, focusing on foreign affairs and breaking new situations. Mr. Koul rose to limelight when he initiated the first ever social media-led campaign in India, Justice for Priyadarsini Matu, in 2006 at the age of 16, and was announced among the top 25 youth icons of the country by India Today magazine in 2007. In recent months, he has traveled to Leh to report on the India-China military standoff at the line of actual control. Mr. Koul was born in Kashmir in 1989 amidst the turmoil. His family had to leave their home at midnight in January 1990 due to sudden rise in terrorism against minority Hindu community. He spent his first few months of his life in a temporary refugee camp in Jammu. With this, Mr. Aditya Koul, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yadu Singh, to the entire Indian diaspora in Australia, to all the organizers who very humbly invited me for this event, but most importantly, my family in Australia, Rajesh Sharma and Meenu Sharma, who actually, when I had first arrived in Australia in 2014 with Prime Minister Modi, actually, kept me at home, and I felt at home, and it was almost a very emotional parting. So with that, I know how the Indian diaspora feels very strongly about it. I heard the Honorable His Excellency A. Gitesh Sharma. We have followed his great work as a diplomat in New Delhi and elsewhere around the globe. Personally speaking, you were very gracious to give me a very long introduction, but I was merely 9 months old when the tragedy actually occurred. My parents, my family had to move out midnight. I still have that bus ticket that my family had purchased to actually reach Jammu. And for the next few months, we were actually staying in a garage, which was, converted into a refugee camp. And, we had to start from the scratch. And we know what happened 30 years. But why did the world really fail? As my co-panelist and our great filmmaker Ashoke Panditji always says, and his world-renowned documentary also said, and the world remained silent. So why did the world remain silent? The world remained silent perhaps because it did not want to acknowledge the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits that happened in 1990. Because the larger propaganda for the last 3 decades has been of Islamist separatism, Islamist terrorism in the Kashmir Valley, and we need to acknowledge it. Today, at least for the last 2 decades, my elder generation, has been telling people across the globe that, hello, we are there, we are a minuscule minority in Jammu and Kashmir, you need to talk about us as well. And we kept reminding the world that, you are silent today, but there will be a day when it will be knocking at your own doors and you will realize it the hard way, unfortunately. And that's what happened. We saw 9/11 happening. We saw 26/11 happening in Mumbai. We saw several other terror attacks, most recently in Austria, in France, in Brussels, in several other areas. So I think there's a growing realization that the terrorism that emanated from Pakistan back then has spread its roots and wings all across the globe. But there needs to be a cohesive approach. The government of India has also done enough to counter terrorism, I would say. There is a convention that has been lying at the tables of the United Nations since 1996. But unfortunately, the global world, the international community hasn't done much at the United Nations level to get that passed. The United Nations has failed, in fact, to even define terrorism till date. So how do we expect the United Nations to come to the shelter of the internally displaced people, Kashmiri Pandits? There has been a silence, a stony silence by the left liberal media as well, unfortunately. And often I'm questioned as well, even though I am a Kashmiri Pandit, I've been a victim of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. But I have been questioned. And I would call myself guilty as well, that I haven't been able to do enough. Back in times nowadays when actually I came to Australia for the G20 and the first bilateral of Prime Minister Modi, we did have a small programming done with Anupam Kherji in his own words, and that traveled far and wide all across India and the world, telling about the plight of the Kashmiri Pandits. And I think over the last decade particularly, there has been a change in the narrative. People across India and the world slowly are realizing what happened with the Kashmiri Pandits. Here is a minuscule minority that was tortured, whose houses were burnt, whose temples were desecrated across the Kashmir Valley, more than 300 of them. And not just the government, but the people need to come and empathize with them, to narrate their story, the story that has been forgotten completely. The recent steps that have been taken by the government of India are a paradigm shift, I would say. I do not compare this with the return of Kashmiri Pandits anytime soon, because I know what the ground realities are. But something that was never thought about, never even imagined, that Article 370 and 35A will be abrogated, has been done by the government of India. And that needs a pat in the back. I mean, that is a huge step. And unfortunately, after the abrogation, we saw a huge narrative campaign, particularly in the Western press, and some politicians sitting in US and UK and other places, discussing the abrogation and saying that how, this is a draconian step by the government of India, and this cannot be tolerated. This is against equality. But the reality remains that this has been done to restore equality. This has been done to, in fact, give equal measures, equal rights to the Dalits who were sitting in Jammu, who did not have rights as per the law, equal to Kashmiris, equal to any people and citizens of Jammu and Kashmir. The women folk, my good friends Manu Kajuriya and Sunanda Vasisth will speak about. They have been doing a tremendous job in US and UK. How continuously the propaganda has run. And very recently, just about 3 days back, there was a Kashmir debate happening in the House of Commons. And I was listening very eagerly what the so-called representatives had to say. And continuous propaganda about India, continuous propaganda about how minorities are being affected, even in Jammu and Kashmir. They didn't even realize that the minorities are actually Kashmiri Pandits and not the majority community in Jammu and Kashmir. There is something very different. I mean, Jammu and Kashmir is the only Muslim majority state in India. And there was only one lone, Labour, fortunately a Labour member of Parliament, Barry Gardner, who actually spoke about the successful District Development Council elections recently. For the first time, Panchayati Raj system, the grassroots democracy is being restored in Jammu and Kashmir. While I do not say that, things will change in Jammu and Kashmir overnight, but there are steps that are being taken. The separatist ecosystem, as somebody spoke about, I think it was the army veteran, the ecosystem that was broken completely. Since I've been reporting from Kashmir regularly, at least for last 7 years, very, very, aggressively from Kashmir, I know the kind of ecosystem, not just in the politics, but in the media, but in the business houses in Jammu and Kashmir, funding this propaganda continuously, earning money at the blood of the innocent Kashmiris who are being killed completely. So that has been shattered. Those people who used to receive money from Pakistan for stone melting, etc., are now locked up in the Tihar jail. Who would have thought that this would also happen? While I also believe that there were tremendous, huge mistakes of New Delhi. There were blunders done, and blunders done by people at power, be it politicians, successive governments, even security agencies. For example, the former Raw Chief A.S. Dullat. I do not want to go into details about how he did what he did, but I think things have changed. Things have changed for good. I do believe that this is an important base that has been set by the government of India. It is for not just the government, but the people to take it forward in Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere. As the High Commissioner said, the Indian diaspora has a huge role to play. While the government in India also needs to change its narrative, making capacity, its messaging, that completely failed in many ways after Balakot and after Article 370 abrogation. We saw a huge attack from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC and the Al Jazeera. But the Indian diaspora has been playing a great role and has to tell the reality of Jammu and Kashmir, the reality of the victims to the entire world. And I do hope that perhaps in future, I do not see a glimmer of hope immediately, but perhaps in future, the Kashmiri Pandits will return. I will return. My friends Bimal, Kaul, Sudhir, Rena, and hundreds others who are in Australia will return, and we will have our own houses in Kashmir once again. And with that, I think I should stop here, and I thank uh, the organizers for inviting me. And we can be in touch later. If there are any queries, etc., you can reach out to me anytime. I'm available. And I do feel very strongly about this issue and continue to try to raise this at least on my social media or whenever I can write about it. And I think it is important to counter the desperate narrative that emanates, particularly from Pakistan and the separatist supporters and the apologists of Islamist terrorism in Kashmir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aditya Bhai. Thank you very much. We knew that you are a fantastic speaker, giving the summary of what exactly has happened, is happening, and possibly will happen if it's not countered. After this, I'm going to now move to another great speaker, Mr. Ashoke Pandit, and he would be introduced by my co-anchor, Mr. Amit Jadon. Amit.
Thank you, Dr. Yadu. It's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Ashok Pandit, who is a name to reckon with in the Indian entertainment industry. Now, from being the president of Indian Film Directors Association to being the member of censor board, he is at the helm of matters in the film industry. But Mr. Ashok Pandit, his real call of the heart is the issue of the exhorters and genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. He sacrificed his personal life in Mumbai. He strived hard to get the cause to a relevant platform and prominence. He has been also relentless in his efforts to get a reservation for the Kashmiri Pandits youth in the schools and colleges of Maharashtra. It was he who chose the path of filmmaking to narrate the lesser told story of Kashmiri Pandits. And in fact, his documentary, The World Remains Silent, still remains to be the first visual record of Kashmiri Pandits' genocide. His film Sheen was the first to narrate the pathos of Kashmiri Hindus' plight. Several acclaimed television shows and recent web series are attributed to Mr. Ashok Pandit. And today he stands tall when the name of celebrated personalities of the film industries are mentioned anywhere around the world. So please welcome Mr. Ashok Pandit. Ashokji, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for Yaduji, for organizing this interesting, heart-wrenching webinar. I say my pranams to everyone on the panel, all the luminaries who are part of this webinar. It's really painful when you start talking about how you suffered the worst possible genocide and ethnic cleansing. Now, to begin with, I was in Mumbai and doing very well in my field. My television shows were doing very well, and suddenly, 89 onwards, we saw the selective killings happening in Kashmir. So when we saw the dead body of Tiklal Chaplu Saab, we saw Justin Neelkant Ganju's body on the street, we saw Lasa Kaul killed outside his house, and then Memnath Bhatt. So that confidence level of a Kashmiri Hindu started going down, and we for a moment could understand why is this happening. Before there were blasts here and there, and एक माहौल जो टेररिज्म का था वो बनना शुरू हो गया था, पर हमें ये नहीं पता था कि हमारा जो पड़ोसी है वो मिला हुआ है हमको मारने के लिए या हम पे अटैक करने के लिए और हमें वहां से निकालने के लिए. Now, all things whatever happened, we are all aware of it. We have been talking, we have been screaming, we have been shouting from last 30 years now. We heard Aditya, we heard Sunanda, we heard earlier speakers as to what happened. We heard about the mosques, we heard about the loudspeakers. We all know about it now. I think 30 years is enough for people to know that what happened to this community of us. Now, when I was shooting my film and The World Remains Silent, I was not aware of the title also that time because I picked up my camera. I got my team from Mumbai, and in Jammu, when I saw trucks, cars, whatever vehicles they got, they came in, and the entire karma, entire exodus I saw with my own eyes when they came to Jammu and they were Gita Bhavan, the great passionate workers like Amarnath Vaishnavi ji, the entire community in Jammu, they stood up. I'm thankful to the local Jammu Dogra community who took you up the arms, who saw to it that they are, we are all looked after. And everybody didn't know what's happening. Now this, when people came this side, when they had crossed the tunnel, सबको ये लगा था कि ये बहुत ही टेम्पररी मूवमेंट है, हम महीने 2 महीने में हम लौटेंगे वापस या whatever. It was a temporary movement. But boss, it is 30 years now. It's more than 30 years that we have lived our lives like a refugee in our own country. Blame terrorists, blame government, blame Congress, blame foreign powers, blame communists, blame intellectuals of this country. But when I was moving from camp to camp, whether it was Purku, whether it was GD, whether it was Udhampur, they were blank faces, whether it was a young girl, whether it was a child moving in the camps. And thanks to Jagmohan, we should be thankful to this man and not forget this man, that this man stood tall. Two people who have greatly, stood by this community was Jagmohan and Balasaheb Thackeray. Let us not forget that, because Balasaheb Thackeray, on my request, on my, this thing to him, he started this entire, admissions to us in our educational areas. So whatever happened, I think we are all aware of it. Now coming to what I'm looking forward, what we want and what we have to do. What is the community looking out for? I as a Kashmiri Hindu and Indian, I personally feel that international diaspora. Dr. Saab, you are such a great entrepreneur, the way you are handling this webinar also. Internationally, the symbol of Kashmiri Hindus' pain, the symbol of my genocide, the symbol of my ethnic cleansing, the symbol of my rape, the symbol of my killing is Jakti camp now. Jakti camp is the face of my exodus. Jakti camp is the concentration camp is the face of my ethnic cleansing. And this Jakti camp should be known internationally, world over, that this is what is the face of my tragedy, my ethnic cleansing. The problem is that we all over the world are talking about Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmir problem, ethnic cleansing and all that. But the tragedy is the people who are the biggest sufferers of this tragedy now are the people living in Jakti camp. Let us not forget that. There is no proper basic amenities to them. There is no proper medical facilities to them. There is no proper colleges, schools to them. They have to travel kilometers away. If anybody falls sick, they have to, on the way, serious patients die. So if we are talking about eradication of 370, fine, we are all okay with it. It's a great magic and a great miracle which this government has done, which we had never imagined. Panchayat elections, fantastic. It's a great victory. For the first time, we saw Indian national flags in Kashmir. But my concern today is what is for the people who are. I am in Mumbai, Aditya is in Delhi, everybody in Australia, America, everybody is raising their voices. But my issue, of the thing which I want to raise today in this great webinar of ours is, let us concentrate on Jakti. Let us speak these people suffering there. Why till date? This is a question. Why till date? None of the senior leaders, I don't want to name them, any political party has visited Jammu Jakti camp till date. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? A concern of Kashmiri Hindus. Why has not a single political leader, senior political leader of any political party not visited Jakti camp till date? Why? So, the fear is Am I being used? Am I? Is my tears being sold? Is my tears being used to create the atmosphere of nationalism? Is that true? And if not, then I think a special committee from the center should be deputed to see to it that every person, every family struggling hard, trying to survive in Jakti should be taken care. I keep on going there. I stand there in, I stand there when you stand there between in midst of Jakti, you feel that you are in a prison. It's a jail. It's a jail, friends. It is not right. बड़ी बड़ी बातें करनी हमको आती है, हम सब बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं, अब ये होगा वो होगा. मेरा कंसर्न ग्राउंड लेवल का कंसर्न है. Me, Ashok Pandit, and all my colleagues, all my friends is concerned today about Jakti. Next, very important point. We have been told, a lot of people tell us, यार अभी तो सब सेटल हो गए बाहर, सब इधर उधर हो गए, अब कौन जाएगा वापस? I have a ray of hope. Aditya also said this, that he also wants to go. I've been interacting with a lot of youngsters, generation after mine and after that generation also. I am interacting with 8-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid, 15-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid, and 21-year-old. The youths of Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus. You'll be surprised the way the young painters of my community, the young musicians of my community, the young poets of my community, the young actors of my community, the young artists of my community are presenting the pain of Kashmiri Hindus in the most finest way that we also fail to do that. My film And the World Remains Silent can't stand in front of a painting or an animation created by Savvy Bhatt, who's an American now. There are young painters like, Vibhuti Koul, Savvy Bhatt, Shweta Raina, Bhasha Sumri, who's a great actress, daughter of Dr. Abhishekar, Abhay Raina, Dhani Kaul. They are filmmakers. I request the international community, especially settled abroad, that we have to pick these people up and encourage these people. And everybody wants to go back. So this facade created by our enemies that nobody is going to back, then especially the local Kashmiri Muslims there, सिमचे बना रहे हैं. Tell us, क्या है तो वापस क्या आएंगे, आप क्या आएंगे, आप वापस आने वाले नहीं है. So that narrative which has been spread that we are not going to go back with Kashmir it has to be killed. The third fear, I'm sorry, I'm being very direct, and after 31 years one has to be direct. You don't have any other choice. The second fear is the narrative which has been created by the urban naxals and the Tukre gang, and which is not only a threat to Kashmiri Hindus, but also to the entire nation. The narrative which they have created, when I confront them on television debates, there is so much of poison being created against us by this gang of Tukre and urban naxals against Kashmiri Hindus and Kashmir and the present regime, present dispensation of Narendra Modi and all that. So we, as Indians, are confronting them on every level. I'm not denying that, but it is creating lot of problems for us. They somehow try to discourage us. They somehow try to say that Kashmiri Hindus are settled all over. They are making money. They are minting money. Now, the narrative they're trying to create is, why is Ashok Pandit, if he's a refugee, why is he not with torn clothes? Why is he not begging on the street? Why is he not crying? Why is he sounding happy? Why is he succeeding in life? Why is he progressing? So to discourage us, to give us a feeling that you are a nobody, they try to act on these things. So for me, I think towards the end, I would like to say that the best way to preserve our culture, to preserve our identity, to preserve our will to go back, and we will go back. The best way is to protect my music, my poems, my plays, my writing, my scriptures, my paintings, and all those professionals, great professionals of my community. I salute each and every one who has sacrificed his life. That Kashmiri Pandit who died in Kashmir, those security forces who died in Kashmir to save me so that I can sit here today and try to talk and spread whatever wrong has happened to us. But I'm sure and I'm very confident, and I'm really very confident on the 19th, the way things will, come up. Let us start. Let us decide a Twitter, and Twitter trending this thing. What should be and that should be a common trend. That line, Kashmiri Hindu Exodus Day, and we should trend at number 1 for the entire day. Let the world know what Kashmiri Hindus are, what Hindus are, and what Indians are by going all out on the 19th and create a big threat perception to all the enemies of our country. That this is not that easy. On the 19th, I'm releasing a small 3-minute video, which is presented. I presented a very well-known rapper called Koul. He shot the entire video on Kashmir, and which says Hosla. On the 19th, I'll be releasing that. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, Yadu Singh ji, and all the great people who have inspired me, inspired the entire community, who are all here in this panel of ours. Namaskar, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Ji. Now the next speaker is Ms. Manu Kajuriya. She is from the UK, and she will be introduced by a friend from Perth, Ms. Sonal Bhushan. Sonal.
Thank you, Yadu Singh ji. Thank you, sir. It's a great honor to introduce Manu Kajuriya, who is a freelance writer and activist from Jammu and Kashmir with a focus on the region, its history, culture, and current issues. She is the founder director of Voice of Dogras, a community organization which espouses the rights of the Jammu region and aims to preserve and promotes its unique history and cultural identity. She has presented many papers and been a TV panelist in India and abroad, and through her organization Voice of Dogras created a body of audio visual content on Jammu and Kashmir, including a documentary titled October 26th on the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India. As the General Secretary of Friends of India Society International UK, she works on strengthening of UK-India relationship. She was awarded the prestigious Maharaja Gulab Singh Memorial Annual Award in 2019 and was felicitated by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in 2019. She is currently residing in London and is working on a book on Jammu region as an author. Over to you, Manudi.
Thank you so much, Sonal. Namaste, everyone. And especially, I thank the organizers and the Diaspora in Australia and people like Prashant Singh ji and Dr. Yadu Singh ji who have been in touch with me for this event. Let me begin with, and I ask for your permission because this is a little disturbing piece, but I'm beginning my presentation with a little reading of one paragraph from this book. And it's in Hindi. I'm sure everybody understands Hindi. जब हम झेलम नदी पर पुल पार कर रहे थे तो सैकड़ों हिंदू औरतों ने अपहरण और बलात्कार से बचने के लिए नदी में कूदकर आत्महत्या कर ली। नदी के ठंडे और तेज पानी में लाशें तैर रही थीं। कुछ औरतें नदी किनारे पर निराश मगर पक्के इरादे से जौहर के लिए खड़ी थी। उन्होंने पहले अपने बच्चों को नदी में फेंका और उनकी दर्दनाक चीखों को नकारती रही। अपने बच्चों को मरते उस वक्त तक देखती रही जब तक उनके सिर 1 या 2 बार पानी से ऊपर आते और उनको नदी निगल जाती। सहमी हुई इन औरतों की भावनाएं मर चुकी थीं और चेहरों का रंग फीका पड़ गया था। तब इन माओं ने खुद भी नदी में कूदकर जान दे दी। ये सब देखकर पुल पर खड़े कुछ बच्चे अपनी माओं की टांगों से लिपट गए। पाकिस्तानी फौजियों के धमकाने, डराने और उनको वहां से खींचने और रोकने की सभी कोशिशें बेकार गईं और दाह जारी रहा। इस तरह शान से मौत को चूमा गया. I have just read to you not a fictional piece, but a paragraph from Balki Gupta ji's book, Mirpur ki Trasadi Vismrit Atyachar. And I start from here because if you haven't heard about the atrocities of Mirpur, which occurred in 1947, this is symptomatic of how so many of these human stories haven't reached so many of us within India and as well as outside. This is just one instance of what was happening in 1947 to Hindus and Sikhs. This is just a fraction of what happened to them. If you look and hear and if you research what happened in Kasguma, what happened in Thathial, you will be shocked. Instances of 500 men being taken from Kasguma, asked to strip, killed by swords and axes, as their women are raped, are kidnapped and sold in the markets of Peshawar. Of somebody like Dr. Kulveer Gupta, who's written another book on Mirpur, who speaks how some of the Sikh women who were in the infamous Alibag prison camp in 1947, and they were finally rescued by the ICCR, the International Red Cross, the Sikh women were cutting off their children's hair so as not to be identified as Sikh. Of Balki Gupta ji, who was actually reunited with his mother after 3 years. She was amongst 100 women who were kidnapped by not just locals, but by even the Pakistani army and the tribal raiders who had entered Jammu and Kashmir in 1947. Similarly, in Rajouri in 1947, women were consuming poison because they didn't want to fall into the hands of these raiders who had already, you've heard of the famous raids that were happening in Baramulla in 1947. All this happened in 1947, and before a Jakti camp, there were camps at Simbal, at Khor, at Badi Brahmanam, at Railway Tatri. There was a Bakshinagar that was created for these people, for these Mirpuris, for these people who were coming from Bhimbar, which saw some of the worst massacres. And let me point out here that such was the communal nature of Sheikh Abdullah's Kashmiri government that these people who were people from the erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir were not allowed to come into Kashmir Valley. No settlement was allowed there. Not even refugee camps. All these people came to Jammu. I'm glad Ashoke ji brought up Gita Bhavan because I've grown up, I was actually a witness to my grandfather, my Nana ji actually going to Gita Bhavan in the 1990s and doing surveys there, and he would come back distraught. So when he said Gita Bhavan, I immediately remembered my grandfather. So Jammu has been a refugee capital because it's been home to these fleeing populations since 47. And I started from 47 because if you haven't heard the story of 47, this is exactly why 1990 happened. This is exactly why when the Kashmiri Pandits were thinking, why hasn't there been a hue and cry at the Indian Parliament? We have to come back to 47 and think that there was no hue and cry for the Mirpuris. Delegation after delegation went to Nehru. There was Balraj Madhok, there was Premnath Dogra, there was Ashok Chaudhary. All these people, Meherchand Mahajan, they went again and again seeking justice, asking, even before that, Maharaja Hari Singh sent Lieutenant Colonel Bhagwan Singh asking for arms and ammunitions to defend these frontier villages. And it didn't come. They were left on their own. Just like Kashmiri Pandits today tell us that yes, they were left on their own. There was nothing in terms of, or very little in terms of help from the state. They're still waiting for justice to happen. And I start from there, again, I repeat, because if you haven't heard of that, it is time for you to learn of all the massacres that have happened in Jammu, not just in the valley, but elsewhere. As some of our, somebody said, we have to hear of and know of all these massacres. I don't claim to, or I don't want to talk about the valley in 1990 because I think my Kashmiri Hindu brothers and sisters do a better job is the wrong word, but they would be the rightful owners of that human story, of that tragic story. When the organizers reached out to me, my first thing was that, I don't know whether you know, but I'm a Dogra from Jammu. This is about the KP exodus, and I think they should be speaking about it. I'm going to stand with them in solidarity but this is their story and you need to hear from them. And I'm glad that the organizers gave me a chance to talk about the other stories, which are similar in nature, where you will see that exactly the same things have happened in J&K, but nobody talks about them. And I'll give you another example. This is another very painful story, and I've talked to the young man who lost his father. And the father's name is Ashish Ruchir Kaul. Their family in 1947, they fled from the valley and they came to Bhadarwa. This is in Jammu region. Again, Jammu giving refuge and opening their hearts to these fleeing populations. So Ashish Ruchir Kaul's family comes to Bhadarwa. His grandmother, or a few generations before, the matriarch of the family, Sukhmali Kaul, is an amazing woman who starts a school in Bhadarwa for girls, probably the first school in Bhadarwa for girls. And many years down the line, in 1992, two young boys who had gone into the forests somewhere in Bhadarwa, they are killed by the Islamist terrorists. And according to the reports, their eyes are gouged out, their liver is gouged out. And that's when Ashish Ruchir Kumar says, no more. I am going to fight this. I am not going to run away, but I'm going to fight this. And he forms a defense committee. He mobilizes the population there. For 41 days, he organized a strike, a protest, to highlight what was happening in Bhadarwa and Kishtwar. At that time, it was Doda district. This was the erstwhile district of Doda. And the size of Doda district at that time was just a few hundred square kilometers less than the valley. And it was infested with terrorism. The Hindu populations were being targeted. The village defense committees that came up as a response, because the police was not able to handle that. So they were targeting people like Ashish Ruchir Kaul, who said, okay, I'm going to form a defense committee and I'll fight against those Kalashnikovs with kassas and with, country rifles, etc. And so he gets killed in 1994. He's working in the fields adjacent to his house, working with his young wife, who was a Bhadarwahi Dogra. He was working with her in the fields and he's gunned down. There are 30 to 40 bullets. He took them all on his chest, not on his back. His young wife, who was only 26, actually consumed poison because she was so distraught. She was revived and she came back to life, so to speak, and miraculously after 21 days or 40 days, his son tells me. So this is a story of Bhadarwa, and so many have been killed in Bhadarwa. If you just try and find out the stories from Bhadarwa where people have actually resisted. They have stayed on, they have formed village defense committees, and they have fought against terrorism. This was 94. When we look at 98, Prankot massacre, 26 Hindus were killed by Islamist terrorists. They were butchered, they were slaughtered because they refused to convert to Islam and they refused to eat beef. The village is so remote that it took 10 hours for the authorities to hear about that such an incident has taken place in these forests, because the geographical terrain of Jammu region is actually even more mountainous and really, really remote compared to many areas in the valley. So it took 10 days for authorities to know that something like this has happened in Prankot. They've been slaughtered, they've been charged to death. And it took 1 day for the authorities to reach the village in Prankot to address the situation, and women and children were also massacred. Now, when we come to another incident in 1998, the Chapnari incident. There's a family going to attend joyously a wedding. This was a part of a wedding procession. They are gunned down. None survives. 2000. So many massacres. And Hindus have definitely been targeted. There is no doubt about it. But the few Muslims, the Gujars and Bakarwals who were targeted in the 2000s, 2006, 2002, they were the ones who were nationalistic. There was an incident in Poonch where an entire village defense committee of Gujars and Bakarwals was attacked by the terrorists because they had raised the Indian flag on 15th of August. And this was covered in the news. There used to be a program called Kashmir Nama. It was covered there, and then this particular village was attacked for being pro-India, for being nationalistic. There have been twin attacks on Raghunath Mandir, which is in the heart of the Jammu city. There has been a terror attack in Kaluchar. I come from a border tehsil in Jammu district. I belong to a border tehsil, and there have been instances of, you usually read in the newspapers that there is a tunnel which has been dug and someone has come in. We are very desensitized to this news, but someone in Arnia, which is the largest IB town in Jammu district, someone lost their husband because there was this farm labor who was doing his thing in the morning. In the fields, he was working, he was doing something, and this person who had used the tunnel to infiltrate shot him down. This lady, she still hasn't really properly received justice for what happened. She didn't get a government job. So these are the instances, these are just some of the human stories. There are so many more. When I talked about Prankote, 1,000 people migrated from these upper reaches in the mountains of Riyasi. It used to be Udhampur district at that time. Now it's a part of the Riyasi district. And they moved to towns surrounding Riyasi. Thousands of them moved. We very casually refer to it as the Jammu Hills migration, which no one else would probably have heard about it. But so many have had to move. So many have had to leave their mountain villages. They've had to come to the towns, and they are living a very miserable life, and the kind of life Ashoke ji described about Jagti camp. There are many such camps. And this, I remember I had asked the first Exodus Day event that I had attended in UK. It had been organized by KPCS, and Voice of Dogras had also, we were a part of the organizing committee, so to speak. I had asked this, that how long can we keep marking this event? And then, because where is the solution? When are the Kashmiri Hindus going back home? When are these villagers from Prankote going back to their village? Has their confidence been restored? But then I realized that these stories are very important to tell, because as I lived in UK, there was a rally being organized for Burhan Wani. I had to write to the mayor of Birmingham, I had to write to the mayor of London and say that I don't feel safe as an Indian, as a Hindu from Jammu and Kashmir. I don't feel safe anymore. Because here is a rally celebrating a well-known terrorist. As my friend Aditya pointed out, that recent debate on Kashmir. So when I moved to UK with my family, I was shocked at the amount of events, the discussion that happens around Kashmir. And only recently in a meeting with the High Commissioner of India in UK, I was saying this, that when initially I moved to UK, I would try and attend every event, be it a movie session, be it a discussion in SOAS, be it something happening in the parliament. I would try and be there because I wanted to give a counter to what was being said there as someone from J&K. I wanted to tell them that this is only half of the truth. I mean, it was not even truth. What is peddled here is not even truth. But I started getting exhausted because I started questioning myself that, is it only my problem as someone from Jammu and Kashmir? Should I, as a Dogra Hindu, be the only one standing there, or a Kashmiri Hindu standing there and countering these people? This is a problem for every Indian. This is a problem for all of us. And that's where my work with FISI, which is the Friends of India Society, comes in, or as well as the work with Voice of Dogras, that beyond the community, it is also the responsibility of every Indian to talk about it. We are writing letters to the MPs. We have always failed at it, and I would like to refer to this thing MP Bob Blackman said to me once. We were discussing this issue, and he said to me that, if there is a problem with Israel, I have 200 emails by the time I get up in the morning. I have 200 emails telling me that, no, this is not true. This is what it is. This is the real picture. But if some problem happens about Kashmir or CA or farm bills or just anything, there is no response. We are such good citizens wherever we live because we are educated, we are hardworking, we are law abiding. But somewhere in that 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 of being good citizens and hardworking people, we forget to take a stand and speak up. We forget to write those emails. So this is what I would end with, that this is high time that we together unify, because this is an Exodus day which is important for Kashmiri Hindus, but not just for them, for all of us. What happened to the Mirpuris is important for all of us. What happened in the Jammu region, in Kishtwar, in Doda, in Riyasi, in Udhampur is important for all of us. And we need to change that narrative because the battleground has changed. It is a battle of narratives, and we must speak up unified as Indians and tell the world what the truth is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you. Now, the next speaker is well-known authority actually on the matters of Kashmir Valley, and she became well-known, even more well-known, after she went to the Human Rights Commission or Committee. She spoke there, and it's none else but Ms. Sunanda Vasisth from Austin, Texas. And she will be introduced by my colleague from Perth, Mr. Chetan Vatel. Chetan.
Sunanda Vasisth is a writer, political commentator, and columnist. She's written extensively about the conflict-ridden state of Jammu and Kashmir. She herself has been a victim of ethnic cleansing, as we've discussed, that took place in the valley in 1990 and onwards. In a video that recently went viral, she represented the Kashmiri Hindu voice and addressed the human rights situation in Kashmir at the US Congress's Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. She's now based in the United States of America. I would like to invite Sunandaji to share her thoughts on the subject. Sunandaji.
Thank you, Chetanji. Thank you, Dr. Yadu Singhji. Thank you, Prashantji, to the Indian diaspora in Australia, and to my panelists. The problem of speaking after such articulate speakers is that A, you have to do better than them to be heard and to sustain the interest of their audience, and B, most of what you want to say has already been said. But that was on a lighter note. I was all quote unquote put together for this webinar today. I knew what I was going to say because I speak about Kashmir almost 350 days of year out of 365 days. It's, it comes to me naturally. It's my story. It's not my uncle's story. It's not my second cousin's story. It's not anybody else's story. It's my own story. And usually I'm always ready for this. And then when I come to such sessions and I hear a story like Sushma ji narrated, I forget everything that I had to say. And I remember that night of 19th January 1990, when I, barely a teenager, was in Srinagar, and all the horror stories that you have heard and read, I am an eyewitness to all that. I do remember that night very, very clearly. And it's only now, in last 10 years, we've been displaced, and the ethnic cleansing we're marking 31 years of the shameful ethnic cleansing that has happened. But it's only after the advent of social media and internet, so to speak, that our stories have become public and our people have come to know our stories. Otherwise, when in 1990 we didn't pack our basic necessities, if at all, most of us, and left with a shirt on our backs, and when we moved to places like Jammu mostly, and to Delhi, like my family did, people who gave us refuge would not even believe that we had left everything and come back. I remember we had rented a very small place in a place called Faridabad near Delhi. It's a suburb. And I remember the people around the neighborhood would tell my mother, I was very young, but they would ask my mother, "Aap sab kuch chhod ke aise koi sab kuch chhod ke thodi aata hai? You must be fibbing." And now I understand that why would people say that? And you have to understand the time that this happened. There was only Doordarshan. There was no private media, no private channels, nothing. No one knew what was going in Kashmir. Kashmir was in fire and flames. The entire community had been ethnically cleansed, and yet our countrymen from the rest of the country did not know about it. So when we came with barely anything, bare necessities in our hand, they did welcome us, but they were shocked. They could not believe that anybody could leave their home of 5,000 years. So we have gone through that ignominy, we have gone through that apathy, we have gone through that. What can be worst for the victim is going around and telling your story again and again and again and again, because no one else, there is no official narrative for your story. And today I really want to go, I mean, people have touched on most important things about this day, what happened. There is stuff out there for you to read, but I really want to go back to basics. And the basics is, what can we really do? And where have we gone wrong in last 30 years? Because anniversaries are also a time, as painful as they are, to take stock of what has happened. Otherwise, you can keep observing anniversaries year after year after year, and we can keep going through these motions and these speeches and these programs. Thanks to internet now, all this is possible. 10, 15 years ago, even this was not possible. But we can go through these motions and nothing will come out of it. We would be observing 40th year and 50th year and 60th year of our shameful exodus if we don't listen to, or if we don't resolve 2 or 3 basic things that I want to share with you today. And I think that Indian diaspora everywhere, everyone, Kashmiris, non-Kashmiris, people of Indian origin, everyone can help us fight this fight. Strife and struggle aren't new to Hindus of Kashmir, who over centuries of suppression have been reduced to micro-minority in their own land. The 1990 exodus, as you know, is the 7th known exodus. I call Kashmir Valley the first laboratory of jihad in the world. And the first people to bear the brunt of this jihad were Kashmiri Hindus. We were seen as agents of the government of India, symbols of Hindu India, and we needed to be wiped out. The exodus, the only known exodus in independent India. For those of you who know Indian history very well and know partition, because partition is our own Holocaust and we remember a lot of that, let me tell you that the numbers of people who were dead and raped and maimed may not have been as much as 1947 partition, but let me make it very clear that the scale of the tragedy and horror was no less than partition. Over the years, what has pained the community more than the stories that you have heard today, and more than the loss of their homeland, is this complete silence. It's almost as Ashoke ji was, when he made that film, that documentary, and the world remained silent. I think in those 4 words, he really summed up our story for the rest of the times to come. And the world really did remain silent. Anytime the Kashmir issue was discussed, remember, it was just our voice being silenced. Kashmir issue was never silenced. Throughout the 90s, after our exodus and through the 2000s, you would open a newspaper and Kashmir would always be in headlines because of the terrorism there. So Kashmir was always in headlines. Kashmir was never forgotten. It is Kashmiri Hindus who were forgotten. Our voice was forgotten. So anytime the Masla-e-Kashmir or Kashmir issue was discussed, separatists, terrorists, and all these people, they would be called for, talks or for any solutions. But no Kashmiri Hindu was ever called by any government to really talk about them and to find out what has really happened to them. The liberal narrative, which has really taken its cue from the jihadi narrative emanating from the valley. I think Dr. Yadu Singh said they're cousins, and he was right. They are cousins in a way. And the liberal narrative and the jihadi narrative going together, they still believe. And let me tell you, in this group, although we might be in consensus, but let me tell you, this is a very, very small minority outside in the world about Kashmiri Hindu Holocaust or Kashmiri Hindu genocide. There is not even a consensus on why we were thrown out, on something as basic as that. 30 years from now, there is still no consensus in the outside world, in the liberal narrative, in the overwhelming narrative of Kashmir, when Kashmir is discussed in the parliaments and world capitals and everywhere, there is no consensus on why we were thrown out. And that's a shame, because there are so many of us still alive to tell our story. And probably that is the problem. If we had stayed put and we had been wiped out, there would have been no one alive to tell the story. And I'm sure people who threw us out regret the fact that each one of us was not killed that night on January 19th. The narrative still is, if you go around anywhere, that the then governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Jagmohan, he coaxed us, and I'm underlining this word, coached us to leave our homes. We have seen truth being mauled and butchered in front of our eyes. And this pain of negating our pain, of not even acknowledging why we were thrown out of the Kashmir, this hurts more than the murders, this hurts more than the rapes, and this hurts more than the loss of our families and loss of our homes. It's not easy to overwrite history. I understand that. But I also feel that if there was ever a time to fix this tragedy, this is it. Or we're not going to have time. Or we can keep doing these, I don't want to sound cynical, but we can keep doing these anniversaries. But if we don't, do some positive work on this and really get down to what really needs to be done, we can be doing these anniversaries and observing these anniversaries. And this window of opportunity that has come right now, thanks to Article 370 being abrogated, Section 35A being annulled, and reorganization of the state, which we had never thought about. And these are some very, very bold moves by Government of India in this present dispensation, and they must be applauded for this, for what they have done. So they have done the administrative, they have removed the constitutional hurdle. But beyond that, for the rehabilitation of Kashmiri Hindus, a lot more needs to be done in order to ensure that this seventh exodus is the last one. We have to remember that no Pandit will ever feel safe in Kashmir Valley unless those who killed them and burned their homes are not made to face the court of law. What happened in 1990 was a crime against humanity. Those who perpetrated the violence are roaming free on the roads of Kashmir. No one has been punished, no convictions have been made, no cases have been registered or pursued against the murderers. Justice has to be brought against those who were actively involved in killings. No Kashmiri Hindu, and I can assure you, it doesn't matter how many constitutional provisions are removed and what is done, but no Kashmiri Hindu will feel safe in going back to our homes until the perpetrators who brought us to this point, they are not made to feel, they're not made to stand in front of the court of law. You just heard Sushma Ji's story. Her father, there are living witnesses. And yet, no one is ready to hear her story. We don't know who killed her father. We don't know where they are. And this happened 30 years ago. And this is happening even today. Just a few weeks ago, a jeweler in Kashmir, Satpal Nishchal, he was shot there. And the same thing that happened 30 years ago, the headlines screamed, unknown gunman shot Satpal Nishchal and ran away. We haven't heard who killed him. No one has been brought to justice. This is 30 years later. Before that, the KP Sarpanch, Ajay Pandita, was shot there in broad daylight. Again, just recently, and his murderers have not been brought to book. No one seems to, this is a strange apathy that people shoot us and we take the bullets on our chest, but nobody is interested in finding who did this to us. Nobody is interested in finding the perpetrators of the crime. We go to the Supreme Court of India and they tell us, बहुत पुरानी कहानी है, 30 साल पुरानी कहानी है. You expect us to open this cold case now? We have more bigger issues to do. I mean, we have, for example, running Cricket Control Board of India. I mean, running Cricket of India. We're not going to worry about what happened to you 30 years ago. So that is Supreme Court of India. Then 30 years later, when we are talking about the present crimes, we're telling them, abhi jo hua hai, tell us who killed these people. Who are these people? Why are they not in jail? Why have they not been arrested? We have no answers. Nobody has given us any answers. Then how do they expect us to go back? And how is this rehabilitation going to happen? There are hundreds of variations of what happened in 1990 floating around. But there is only one reason why we left. We left because of the jihad that was perpetrated against us. Because we were told that because of our faith, because of the gods we pray to, we cannot be in Kashmir anymore. This short story, Mukhtasar Si Baat, this small statement is so difficult for everyone to say in India today that it's I mean, without this, I don't even know how we can be even considered, how even our story can even be talked about. I mean, even today in the government parlance, we are known as migrants. I want each one of you to understand this. We are not known as internally displaced. We are not known as genocide victims. We are not known by any other name. We are known as migrants. So if you look at the government paperwork that comes out for anything, we are known as migrants. Migrants are, birds. And I always tell them, I said, why are we called migrants? Migrants are, come from migratory birds who move on their own will, who fly from one place to another on their own will. We did not move out of our homes, out of our state, our own will. Then we were thrown out. Then why are we still called migrants? So for that little change also, I mean, I want to let this audience know that even for this may sound so small to you, that even this nomenclature of migrants, the migrants to internally displaced or victims of genocide, we have not been able to do even this in 30 years. What are we talking about? Any improvement? Or what are we talking about going back? What are we talking about? I mean, unless there is truth and reconciliation, where are we going to go back? What is going to happen to us? In fact, more and more such stories will keep happening. And they do happen. I mean, anytime there is any talk of normalization, any talk of anything, there is a targeted killing. Ajay Pandita's killing, Satpal Nishchal's killing. So, I mean, I am sorry, I am sort of sounding a discordant note in a very hopeful environment. But this is what I feel after 30 years of observing Kashmir so much. And I mean, now 15 years as a writer and a commentator and somebody who studies Kashmir very, very closely, I don't feel very hopeful. And I just want to let you know that in 2019, when in United States, hearings after 370 was abrogated, hearings upon hearings were brought in United States Congress against India, and all kinds of stories were being circulated. And I finally caught a chance 24 hours before the hearing, and other participants had been told, I think, days in advance. I was just told 24 hours before that, if you want to come, you can testify here. And the biggest mistake they made of their lives, because they thought that, they would get away with one kind of narrative. But that story is out now. Everyone knows that. Everyone can see that testimony. I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to let you know something that was not caught by camera. When I was making my interventions, when I was giving my testimony, behind me, what was not picked up by camera were slogans that drove us out from Kashmir that still reverberate in my ears. Hum kya chahte azadi. This was what I was heckled with in United States Congress, the most powerful legislative building in the world. This is what I was heckled with. Every time I was trying to make a point, every time I was trying to give my story, I was heckled with the slogans that drove us out. Hum kya chahte azadi. So I just want to end this with brilliant speakers after me too. I just want to end it with a small anecdote. My grandmother is very unwell right now. She lives in Delhi, and she's in the winter of her life, and she pines for Kashmir. Every time I talk to her, she thinks about going back to Kashmir, and she still thinks that she will make it back. She doesn't understand that, it's not going. I have very small. It's not going to happen anytime soon. I have hopes. We hope. We try every day. Every Kashmiri Hindu goes to bed thinking that we will soon go to Kashmir, but we also know that it's not going to happen anytime in near future. So when I talk to my grandmother, summers in Delhi are very brutal, and I tell her that. She tells me the water from the refrigerator doesn't taste as good as water in Kashmir. And I just chide her. So what do you mean? Water is cold water. It's such good chilled water. Water is water. How can it be different? And she tells me, you don't understand. Water in Kashmir, it quenches my thirst. Water anywhere else makes me even more thirsty. She tells me this in Kashmiri, and then she tells me that I want to go home and I want to die in my own home. That generation, my grandmother's generation, who bore the brunt of this, they are all dying one by one. We are losing that generation. Once we lose that generation, the last generation will be our parents' generation. If we cannot make this happen even then, we would have lost all eyewitnesses. So the time to act is now, and time to talk about our stories is now, and the time to let Government of India know that we need a special investigation team, something that I have been, and I'll end after this, something that I have been screaming for last, I think, 10 years, that we need a white paper made, and that white paper should be presented in the Parliament of India, and everyone should know from the Lok Sabha in India, the Prime Minister should announce why were Kashmiri Hindus thrown out. Only when you have addressed that why will we be able to handle anything else that comes after that why. But have a special investigation team sit, listen to our stories, record our stories for the future, and produce a white paper on our exodus. Without that, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to keep observing these anniversaries. With that, I end. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sunanda. Thank you very much. This is so moving to hear tragedy and the suffering and the persecution and the assault and the murders which happened in independent India in 1990. I mean, this is just so painful to hear. The last speaker for today. Look, I'm going to use my privileges to say he's the best speaker. And Sushilji, I'm saying this also because you are the last speaker. So the best comes to last, and that is, of course, Mr. Sushil Pandit. And Mr. Pandit would be introduced by my friend and medical colleague, Dr. Raghava Sharma. Raghava.
Namaste, aap sabhi ko. Sushil is 56 years old, Kashmiri Hindu in exile. He is from Srinagar in Kashmir and now lives in New Delhi. As a co-founder of Roots in Kashmir, he works amongst those Kashmiri Hindus who grew up in exile. The Roots in Kashmir, among other issues, fights for justice to the victims and survivors of the Hindu genocide in Kashmir. Roots in Kashmir also prepares the next generation of activists and leaders for our struggle. Sushil also publishes Prasnath, a bilingual journal on the culture and identity of Kashmir. He's often sought out by the news channels on the issues related to Kashmir and Kashmir's ethnically cleansed Hindus. Sushil is an alumnus of the University of Delhi and JNU. He makes a living by managing communication for his corporate clients. He also teaches strategic media planning at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication as an adjunct faculty.
Namaskar to everyone, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. January month of every year is commemorated as the Holocaust month of Kashmiri Hindus. We've finished 30 years of commemoration of such a month year after year. I heard Sudhir Raina ji partially yesterday in a similar such program. I heard Sri Vijay Ganju, who was narrating about his father, Justice Neelkant Ganju, who was shot dead few minutes after he left him at Hari Singh Street. I heard Rajendra Premi talk about his father and younger brother found hanging by a tree, bullet-ridden. His father was shot at the forehead where he used to place his tilak, Sarvanand Koul Premi. I heard Anjali Raina talk about her father and uncle hacked to pieces and packed in bags. And they spoke with such chilling, stoic calm. As you just saw Sudhirji speak about what we went through in Kashmir as a community. When you internalize these tragedies, do you really mean and understand the word Holocaust? Because otherwise we are going through such trauma fatigue that words have lost their meaning. They just bounce off our skin. They are mere words in dictionaries. And we seem to have grown numb to these stories that we keep reminding ourselves every year come January. I heard community veterans spoke before me and almost revisited that entire period. And this is really draining, emotionally draining to go through what all happened and what all is happening as that generation passes, pining for home, wishing to be cremated in that familiar crematorium where their predecessors, their ancestors, their parents and grandparents were taken for their last journey. Why is this happening? I won't dwell on what happened 30 years ago so much as what happened thereafter, because that is extremely important to bear in mind. Yes, we are called migrants. It is a shame that we are called migrants, and Sunanda so evocatively reminded us. But let me tell you, this is not an accident of vocabulary for choice of any better word. Government of India believes we are migrants. In 1993, Manu Kashmir, which is an organization of Kashmiri Hindus, the principal organization spearheading our struggle in exile, moved the Human Rights Commission of India. It was already 4 years plus. And it moved a petition saying, kindly acknowledge what happened to us in Kashmir. Kindly have a policy about us. Kindly ask the government to fix responsibility for who did this to us. And Government of India was given a notice by National Human Rights Commission, then headed by Justice Venkatachalaya. And it was Justice Venkatachalaya who eventually wrote in his observations that what happened to us was akin to genocide. I am quoting him verbatim. Akin to genocide. Similar to genocide. Which to me is genocide. What is similar to genocide, what looks like genocide, what genocide does is genocide. But be that as it may, he issued a notice to the Government of India to respond to our petition. And it is Government of India's response on affidavit to National Human Rights Commission that they said Kashmiri Hindus left the valley of Kashmir on their own. They decided to move, is what Government of India's stand in writing was. So nobody should be surprised that we are called migrants. Their paperwork still considers us migrants. And government behaves in a manner that it would behave for what happened to us as migrants. So our problem is not that we face jihad. That of course we do. And it is a relentless jihad of not just few decades. It has been going on for past few centuries, which has reduced us to cipher, to zilch in the valley. And we were reduced to cipher not in some medieval ages. We were reduced to cipher in this day and age under our secular constitution, where we had an army strong 1.5 million, a nuclear power. Not in a country disintegrated and scattered. That year we were 900 million, 90 crore people strong. A parliament of 800 MPs, an elected prime minister. A multi-layered judiciary with Supreme Court, High Court, lower judiciary. We're an open democracy, a vibrant press. I just heard Ashoke Pandit say how he went mad, bouncing from one tent to another, filming in the 90s. We didn't know he made that film, that documentary, and the world remained silent because there was no internet, there was no YouTube at that time. We got to know about this barely 10, 15 years back. World not only remained silent, world remained ignorant, blind to what happened to us. Because while a state driven by jihadi instincts was out to exterminate us, the entire pan-Islamic movement was out to stamp us out from our moorings, from our land. The state who had the responsibility of protecting us was trying to sweep us under the carpet, was trying to pretend otherwise, was trying to whitewash it. It wasn't out of embarrassment that it happened under its nose, under its watch. It wasn't out of shame that they were trying to hide us from the world. It was because they did not want to annoy our tormentors by talking about it, by acknowledging it. Let that sink in, please. All the puffed up super patriots prancing around today must realize this. And it should be repeated as many times as is necessary for everyone to understand that the state under whose watch and care we were supposed to survive as 5% minority in the valley of Kashmir, surrounded by aggressive neighbors who hounded us, was in fact complicit in our wipeout in the valley. If they had done even 10% of what they did in the wake of taking those 5th August 2019 decisions, we would have been in our homes. Let this be understood. It was within the capability of the state. It was within the capability of my country to keep us safe in Kashmir, had they willed so. It wasn't just apathy. It was criminal complicity. And thereafter, a very studied, very deliberate effort to push us under the carpet. It is because of this reason there is no narrative. It is because of this reason, Dr. Yadu Singh, when these webinars take place, when these commemorations take place, these are the initiatives of concerned fellow citizens like you, like others anywhere in the world. It is not the state of India. It is not my government. It is not its institutions. We are not part of their foreign policy. We are not part of their narrative. We are not part of their strategic framework. We are an embarrassment. We are an appendage that needs to be hidden. It's like a deformed limb that you are constantly embarrassed about and you want to hide. As a community, we are socially profiled. My state, my leaders I vote for, leaders I celebrate the victories of in elections, never fail to remind me that this problem is originated by a Kashmiri Pandit called Jawaharlal Nehru. What they leave unsaid is that therefore you had it coming. There is victim blaming going on, sometimes not very silently and quietly, in a nudge, nudge, wink, wink manner. Kashmiri Hindus are profiled socially in order to almost justify what happened to them. Even in exile, they don't look at Jagati. They look at a few exceptions, some well-off people like Sunanda Vasisth in US, like Lakshmi Koul in UK, like Dr. Jyoti Dhar in Midlands, who by the God's grace have done well, by their sheer dint, by their sheer hard work. They are held up as examples of prosperity. And therefore, you needn't worry about Kashmiri Pandits, because they spend lakhs in their marriages to book banquet halls, so you shouldn't really bother too much about those who are scrounging for crumbs. This is the kind of narrative that is slipped in private conversations, not by ordinary people, elected representatives, ministers, those in charge of framing policy, influencing decisions. This is the senior side of it. I am never wanting in applauding the August 5, 2009 decisions. I went mad with celebrations. Like most of us, I never expected this to see in my lifetime. I just couldn't believe. I pinched myself repeatedly when I heard Amit Shah speak in the parliament and utter those words that Article 370 is no longer effective with all its provisions. But then I watched in horror in the subsequent months how, under the pretext of creating a domicile policy, you re-privilege that oppressive demography of Jammu and Kashmir all over again and create hurdles, create barriers for the rest of India to move back into Jammu and Kashmir and restore some semblance of sanity in its demographic proportions, which was completely destroyed in 1990. I see with horror, okay, I was listening to Sunanda again remind you about how Satpal Nishchal was brutally murdered, how Ajay Pandita was murdered before him. In fact, last year in July, in Bandipura, the district president of BJP, Wasim Bari, whose house was barely 90 yards away from the police station, was shot dead sitting in his house along with his brother and father. Wasim Bari was the former district president of BJP Bandipura, no less. He was also assigned a retinue, a posse of security by the PSOs, all 11 of whom were missing on that fateful day. So we can reconcile to the fact that there are guns running loose in the valley and they can pick targets at any place, any time, whoever, and kill. I can for a moment stop questioning that and say these are the hazards of living in the valley today. So far is fine. But what I can't stomach is the fact that this very senior leader of BJP in the valley, working at such risk, does not find a burial place in his local graveyard. That his father, his brother, and he himself are denied burial in the local graveyard because they are activists of BJP and therefore they are expelled from Islam. No Maulvi comes for his final rites, namaz-e-janaza. And the administration, which is a union territory administration under BJP central government today, has to summon a JCB to dig their graves in their orchard and call a PSO for his funeral rites. That is not an ambush. His killing was an ambush. This is what the ground situation in Kashmir is. Whose writ runs there under the present dispensation? Can you imagine we celebrate elections. Very recently, DDC elections took place, and we celebrate it as some return of normalcy, some restoration of democracy. I'm sick and tired of these celebrations because these celebrations started in 1997 when the first elections took place after our exodus in order to signal the return of normalcy. They have proved to be hoax as far as normalcy is concerned. Because it was after those elections that Vandhama took place, where a 4-year-old child was shot dead along with 24 others. A magazine of AK-47 emptied into him to remind India as to what these elections mean. So recent most DDC elections, we again celebrated. I mean, it's incredible that a rout, a kick in your face with less than 3% vote of the total votes cast is celebrated as victory. We are looking at this tamasha repeatedly over and over again. This is incredible, unbelievable. We are pretending to be living in a different world altogether. We don't want to look at the reality as it exists. And that's why we don't want to address it. That is our problem. You know, we boast. Yesterday, I had a senior BJP leader in a seminal webinar, and he said, we have to keep 400 of our activists in their safe camps because they cannot sleep in their own homes. These are Muslim activists of BJP, elected sarpanches of various parties, MLAs and MPs who cannot go to their constituents at will, who move around in the shadow of bayonets. And we celebrate return of democracy. Why? Because we are out winning hearts and minds. When we repeatedly say that no FIR has been worked upon, we do not want to know as a state as to who killed all these victims. We do not want to pursue any prosecution, any conviction, any sentencing. It is because we have given them clemency. Bitta Karate, after confessing to, admitting to killing dozens of Kashmiri Hindus on tape, was allowed to marry, raise a family, and he married a civil servant in Kashmir. Yasin Malik, who's drenched in our blood from top to bottom, was allowed to travel the world over and go to Pakistan and get married and raise a family. And all this while, Indian state, our government, irrespective of who the Prime Minister was, which the party was, spent hundreds of crores on these leaders who justified our killing and our exodus, who claimed that Hizbul Mujahideen are their boys, freedom fighters, who participated in this genocide, were looked after by government of India. In an RTI, they mentioned hundreds of crores in their travel bills, in their hotel bills, in their fuel, in their upkeep of the house, even in their treatment abroad, which cost crores. They were treated like state guests. So I am, like they say, between a rock and a hard place. In our case, there is a jihadi state across our borders and the pan-Islamic movement, which is crushing us. And then there is my state, which is as hostile. Because my existence and my narrative, my story, comes in the way of they winning hearts and minds in the valley. I am told, I was called several times and by senior people told to go soft, to keep shut. Because it annoys the people in the valley. And it makes their task difficult. So we need to reverse this. That is the task. The enemy is the enemy, and the friend wants to be in the bed with the enemy. That's my problem. That's the problem of our community. That's the problem of Hindus at large. Abhi, barely last month, the new industrial policy came for Jammu and Kashmir. They are creating 70 clusters which will have infrastructure in order to grow industry, grow economic activity in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. 46 out of these clusters are in the valley which is disturbed, where nobody wants to invest a dime. And only 24 are in Jammu, barely half, which is peaceful. Because patriotism goes for a discount and separatism carries a premium. Still, it continues. The worldview, the policy structure in the state of India, irrespective of who the Prime Minister is, which the government is, has this policy of privileging the valley of Kashmir, which is now bereft of Hindus, over everything else, because we want to win hearts and minds. And for that, we are willing to even make concessions like not say Jai Hind after your speeches if you are addressing the crowd in Kashmir Valley. You may go around the world reverberating the skies with Vande Mataram and Bharat Mata Ki Jai, but in Kashmir you won't even whisper a Jai Hind at the end of your Kashmir speech, because it could annoy your audience. This is the level of hypocrisy we have come to practice, accept as stratagem. That is what we need to deal with. That is what we need to question. That is what we need to expose. Because till such time this is corrected, there is nothing nuanced about it. It is blatant. Unless we shame it, there's not going to be any change. Our generations will die pining for our crematoriums in Kashmir. We need to understand that. These are hard, bitter truths. You cannot feather touch it, airbrush it, except at your own peril. Because it will not stop at Kashmir alone. There are more than 500 Kashmir clusters festering all over India, and Hindus are packing their bags from there. There's going to be a demographic avalanche. More than 65 districts are already Hindu minority districts. And they haven't festered because of 370. There's no 370 in Kishanganj. There's no 370 in Rampur. There's no 370 in Araria, Khajuria, in Barpeta, in Murshidabad, in Malda, in Malappuram, or in Malegaon. It is the mindset, it is this policy that my state practices under the hypocrisy of secularism, which we need to point at and expose. Thank you for bearing with me for so long. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm sorry if I've hurt a few people. Namaskar.
Sushil ji, thank you for a very insightful perspective which many of us may not have known, and that we have to open our eyes to the situation we are facing. So Sushil ji, of course, was the last speaker from the distinguished panel. Now I'm going to ask my co-anchor, Amit Jadon, to come on and ask a couple of questions quickly from the audience we have. Amit, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Yaduji. I'm a little moved and quite overwhelmed after hearing all these first-hand experiences on the subject, on the topic. However, we have a whole list of questions from the viewers today, but we'll due to the time constraints, we are only choosing a couple of questions. And all the speakers present here, please feel free to jump in and answer the questions put up to you, because these are not directed to anyone in particular. So please feel free to jump in and answer what you feel appropriate to be answered by you. So the first question here is, there is a grave problem of Rohingya illegal settlers in and around the Jammu region. So what do you think could be the long-term consequences of this, and how do you think this can be tackled effectively?
I think on the, I will add a little bit. It is a security nightmare. I mean, there is no other word. I mean, I wish I could say it in any other way. It's a security nightmare that Rohingyas have been made to, quote unquote, settle in Jammu and Kashmir, which is, even by all standards, the disturbed or the most dangerous, as Bill Clinton would say, most dangerous part of the world. It is by design. And there are a lot of local authorities who have been involved in, quote unquote, getting them to settle there, and they are settled near border of Pakistan. And a lot of talk and lot of everybody has been raising this issue, but it has been brushed aside like everything else, that you don't know what is going on or it's not important. But the local Jammu people have already raised their concerns. They have said that, all these people have acquired passports, they have acquired Aadhaar cards, they have acquired, none of them have citizenship, but they have acquired all the instruments that are required to live in Indian state today, and they are feeding on what we call the memories of Indian state without being citizens and without being without any proper legalizing of their citizenship or anything. I honestly don't have answers to this. We really need to speak up about this, and we really need to find answers from Indian government and J&K government, that who are these people, and in a place where demographic invasion is already such a huge issue. I mean, thousands have died fighting the demography of Jammu and Kashmir, and such a sensitive demographics. How can you introduce another set of demographics now and create a whole such mismatch? In Kashmir, you must have read that this whole, after 370 was abrogated and 35A, the biggest fear of the majority population, as is being told to us, is that there will be demographic change. Although none of them acknowledge that the demographic change already happened when Kashmiri Hindus were pulled out. So they will never acknowledge that. But however, this demographic change that is happening in Jammu every day in front of us, in front of our eyes, is somehow not of consequence, or no one is bothered about this. So I am as clueless as the person who asked the question. I wish I knew what was going on with Rohingyas in Jammu and Kashmir.
I want to add, because I wrote an article specifically on the Rohingya issue in Jammu. And let me just give you some figures, and these could be an estimate which is lower on the lower side, that almost 13,500 Rohingyas are living in Jammu. What is unbelievable is that they've traveled all the way from Bangladesh, and you don't have as many Rohingyas anywhere else in the country except in this Jammu region. So there is an intentional Islamization of the Jammu region, and we have to call it out like that. After I had written this article, there were lots of labels on me, like, you're a Sanghi, and that's why you have a problem with the Rohingyas. But the fact remains that up until August 5th, 2019, I was a victim of Article 35A. So my state was asking me or telling me that you are not or do not have full legal rights, but it was the same state which was giving all rights to Rohingyas. As Sunanda mentioned, they had a domicile. My children didn't have a domicile. They still don't. I have to process that. I have one, but my children didn't have domicile because their father comes from another part of the country. But Rohingyas who had traveled all the way from Burma, Bangladesh, had domiciles. They are currently being employed by the municipality in Jammu. So you can see that there is it's like the state is actually participating in this process of getting them settled there. There are madrasas being run there, and by their own admission, the security forces call them a ticking time bomb because they can be exploited. They are very close to the military camp there in Sunjwa. This is not very far from where my parents live in Jammu city, and the landscape has changed. Bangladeshis and Rohingyas, the area my parents live, it's completely changed. So definitely, it was an intentional, purposeful move, for allowing them to settle there, and it must be raised. And there is a great urgency. I want to stress on that there is a great urgency that it should be raised, and and whenever we raise it, we are labeled as not being secular. What they did to us during the Amarnath land agitation, that Jammu is not secular, they are communal, and that's why they have a problem with Rohingya. So this is the kind of narrative I'm just preempting. This is already happening, and this will happen, that the minute you raise this, they will not see it as a security issue. They will not see that you didn't give full rights to West Pakistanis and POJKNs. You didn't address the issues of Kashmiri Hindus. You didn't address the issues of Jammu Hindus who have migrated. You didn't address the issue of the women of Jammu and Kashmir who you gave a state nikala thanks to Article 35A, but they will speak for Rohingyas. So definitely we have to collectively raise this issue, and urgently so.
While it is a fact that Rohingyas have been settled in thousands, and they were brought in towards the fag end of 2012, early 2013. India was ruled under UPA, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and Kashmir was under Omar Abdullah, National Conference Congress coalition government. They came in thousands, and it was obvious that they didn't come floating in ones and twos or hundreds or 200s, and they were brought in there systematically in a state which has demographic sensitivities. And Amarnath land agitation was about a few acres at more than 13,000 feet for temporary tenements for the pilgrims. But here, they took over an entire Bhatindi forest. That this is a demographic invasion of Hindu majority province in Jammu and Kashmir is very clear. But there is another dimension. We thought that a patriotic government in 2014 would at least begin to reverse it. That hasn't happened. What has in fact happened is that NDA-1 government saw coming of a law called Roshni Act. Farooq Abdullah was the chief minister in 2002. He was part of NDA. And then subsequent government in different coalitions of all permutations and combination, Congress, PDP government, National Conference, BJP government, PDP, BJP government, Congress, National Conference government, till 2020, which means in full 2 decades, all parties, all leaders, all governments were complicit through Roshni Act, getting this demographic invasion hastened. And a lot of government land, forest land, river land was simply occupied. And given away. Most of these occupants, more than 95%, are Muslims in a Hindu majority province. Lakhs and lakhs of canals of this land has been taken up. Everyone is complicit. Now, in 2014, a young spirited lawyer, Ankur Sharma, filed a petition, and Jammu and Kashmir High Court, as a result of that petition, also started an inquiry, put this law in abeyance. Eventually, the governor was forced to annul it. And some of those politicians who patented patriotism rushed to take credit for it. But what nobody knows probably well enough is that barely 2 months back, the present UT administration, which is under the central government, has filed for a review of the High Court order. Can you imagine? You rush to take credit and then you quietly file for a review of this order. This is the kind of politics we are up against. We have a problem on our hands because somebody is trying to monkey balance on this issue. We are trying to bring politicians into kickstarting the democratic process. The same politicians who were rubbished on the floor of parliament when Article 370 was shown the door, when their dynasties were exposed, and when it was squarely laid at their door that if Kashmir is suffering from jihad, if it has been handed over to Islamic extremism, it is thanks to these leaders and their families, their dynasties and their governments. And now we are trying to protect their ill-gotten gains by nudging the High Court in reviewing the order which simply nullified Roshni Act and ordered CBI to make a list of all these illegal beneficiaries and recover those lands from them. So Jammu is suffering not because of somebody's ignorance or apathy. It is out of policy. The problem is Kashmir has been cleansed of Hindus. Jammu is a stumbling block. And it needs to be neutralized before you package it and hand it over. And we need to see this writing on the wall as clear as it is.
Thank you, Sushilji. Once again, very well put together thoughts around the facts, which no one can deny. I'll move on to the next question, which is more of an ask for your advice and recommendations. So what would be the most important piece of advice or recommendation that you would have for the Kashmiri Hindus and Kashmiri Pandits in the valley who were forced into this exile moving forward in the future? And once again, anyone please feel free to jump in and answer this.
Let me take that. Thank you, Amit, for this question. But before advising Kashmiri Pandits, which we often do anyways, we question and advise our community folk on a daily basis. It's important to advise the government. It's important to advise those in power right now, those who can change history, those who can change the way things have developed over the last 3 decades. So the advice would be to create that conducive atmosphere that they have been speaking about, the successive governments, be it the Congress or the BJP. And that conducive atmosphere will only happen if at least one conviction happens of the killers of the Kashmiri Pandits. Imagine, where else in the world, as highlighted by my previous panelists, will there be a case where not just the Kashmiri Pandits, but even unarmed Indian Air Force personnel have been killed, have been slaughtered by terrorist Yasin Malik of JKLF, and the case has been pending in a special CBI court. I say this again, a special CBI Tada court of Jammu for last 31 years. And only after 30 years now, the case has been reopened, and just last week, charges have been framed, not in this case, remind you, but in a case of kidnapping of Rubia Saeed. So imagine, The wheels of justice are only moving after 31 years. And even after 31 years, there is no urgency. The court meets at least once a month, decides on the next date. If the lawyers are not available, the lawyers keep on changing. Yasin Malik certainly is in jail, but that does not mean that justice has been done. So the initial thing that the government of India needs to do immediately is to set a time frame that within 6 months, the cases that have been pending against terrorist Yasin Malik will be put to trial, and finally he will be convicted and sent to the gallows. So that hasn't happened over the last 3 decades. That needs to be the beginning. Also, not just about Kashmiri Pandits, of course I spoke about this because that's the theme that we have been debating here. Give security to your own people. There are Kashmiris, both Muslim, Hindu, Sikhs in Kashmir Valley who are nationalist, much more nationalist than you and me, who speak about India. And when they demand security, when they demand that they need to be heard by the government, by the chief secretary, by the DGP, by the LG, they've been shunted out. So I think they need to be given security. They need to be assured that if you speak the truth, you will not be hunted down. There are remarkable brave people like Ajay Pandita that Sunanda spoke about, who were gunned down. And till now, we do not know who the killers are. So I think there needs to be much more that the government of India needs to do. Unfortunately, what has happened, and that happened in the previous governments also, is that if there is a small achievement, be it the abrogation of Article 370 or 35A, and immediately after the abrogation, you forget everything. And you think that, it's a massive achievement that has been done and dusted, a historic achievement, and we will win the next elections only on this plank. That should not be the mindset. The mindset should be of changes that need to be made. The damage that has been done for more than 3 decades, and Islamist onslaught that has happened in Kashmir Valley, that needs to be changed. To begin with, the kind of propaganda that comes against us, that needs to be countered. And that cannot be just merely countered through a few press releases or just ignoring the reality of what's been happening in Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya.
I would like to come in there, Amit, if just a quick this thing. I would like to come in there. I don't know if it is life getting onto me or what it is, but I have become a pragmatist from an optimist now. So as a pragmatist, I'm no one to advise my people. They've gone through so much, but I have a request, and I would like to use this platform to make that request. I want the younger people who are who understand this technology very well, these iPhones and all this. Record the stories of your grandparents, record the stories of your parents, of what they have done in Kashmir, what they used to do in Kashmir, what their lives were in Kashmir, what their stories are. We are losing the stories, and these stories are precious for us, not just for us, but the history needs to be recorded. We need to put everything, we need to chronicle everything. Let's all become chroniclers of our times. Let's all become chroniclers of our history. Older generation has not been able to do it. They don't have that facility with the media and with all these technology things that we have. But our generation can do it. I do it with my grandmother. I sit with her, I talk to her, and I record everything that she has to say. Some of those stories, some of those events, they will be lost after 10 years. No one will know that this even happened in Kashmir. So for our history and for our history to be maintained, we need that chronicling. So anybody who can help with that chronicling, please go ahead and do it. That's my request.
Answer. Someone has just raised this point that we hear the claims that the number of Kashmiri Hindus affected by this has been around 500,000, and a lot of people don't understand how such a large number was forced into exile without any struggle or any attempts to fight back. And so the question aims to ask is, was that really the actual number? And if not, how many families or Kashmiri Hindus were actually affected in reality?
Okay, let the facts speak for themselves. In Jammu, the relief commissioner had registered more than 62,000 families in Jammu itself. And if you keep even a conservative average of 5 to a family, it makes it more than 300,000. In Delhi, there were about 15,000 odd families. There were many families who didn't register anyway. So there was this number. Now, anyone who knows Kashmir would know that we were not living in clusters like the minority clusters you see in rest of India, ghettos. We were spread thin in a valley of more than 6 million, 5.5, 6 million. We were spread thin across cities, mohallas, villages, sometimes in a minority of 2 or 3 houses in a neighborhood of, say, 50 or 60 or 100 houses. And largely in white-collar professions, focused on education. We were completely unarmed and unprepared. So very often I hear some polite questions suggesting that why wasn't there a resistance? Even suggesting that, it was sheer cowardice that you tucked your tails and fled. Why didn't you fight and die? I would like to ask people who ask these questions, have they ever lived in an aggressive neighborhood in a minority of 1 or 2 and lived through generations, suffering the hostility and suffering the discrimination and humiliation, and yet continued upholding your identity, going about your temples, your worship, your visible symbols of wearing a tilak, a dejhoru, going about your chores, swallowing that humiliation and discrimination. So we were a very small minority which were left to our devices by the state and hardly prepared for what happened. We were up against Kalashnikovs and grenades when we had barely kitchen knives for safety, and women and children as our responsibility. Any resistance was a suicide. And we had to choose between suicide and a complete dishonor and brutalization of our families, of the vulnerable. What do you choose? To fight another day, or just jump into a foolhardy contest of which the outcome is crystal clear? When there is no deployment of paramilitary, when police has disappeared into thin air, and when entire neighborhood converges upon you, when the local mosques become the staging points for propaganda and for assault. So such questions are very easy to ask. But if you are really keen to know, I guess you must get into the situation there. And the choice is left. Look at other places across the country. Look at what is happening. In Kairana, which is less than 100 kilometers from Delhi. In 2011 census, the population there was almost 20% Hindus. The next census is yet to happen. But the rough estimate is it is barely 6-7%. Less than 100 kilometers. Neighborhoods in Delhi, the capital city. Go to Sundar Nagari, go to Mangolpuri, go to Indralok, go to places in Jama Masjid area, Chandni Chowk area. So, if you have really the interest in knowing what is happening in, I call them conflict zones. These ghettos are liberated areas. Even police doesn't dare go there on a routine check or look at or nab a criminal. We've allowed such areas, such liberated zones in our cities, in our habitats. And we are paying a price for it. So in Kashmir, we were faced with a completely different situation altogether. There was absolutely no scope of resistance. And when state itself is unwilling to resist, what do?
Thanks again, Sushil ji. I think we can conclude this Q&A session here. Dr. Yaduji, I hand this over back to you to deliver the note of thanks.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you. Before I give vote of thanks, I just want to make one point, and that is this. The Kashmir issue, the issues of our brothers and sisters from Kashmiri Pandit people, that's not only their problem. That's my problem, our problem too. This is the problem of whole India, because you can go through the history, 7 exodus, you go through Rajputana, you go to Mughal rule. So this is not just one example. We need to learn from our history unless we want to repeat this again. So that's the message which I have got very loud and clear from Sushilji's perspective, and I absolutely agree with that. We have to learn from our history, and we have to work together. Friends, on behalf of Indian Diaspora of Australia, it is my pleasure to offer vote of thanks. Our gratitude and sincere appreciation to the distinguished guests, panelists, for their time and outlining their perspective on Kashmiri Hindu exodus. Thank you very much, Mr. Aditya Koul. You are a champion, a great journalist. Mr. Ashoke Pandit, a great filmmaker. And Ms. Manu Kajuriya, we have heard you with so details. Well, thank you very much. Ms. Sunanda, Vasisth, of course, and Mr. Sushil Pandit. Sir, you are, I don't know what to say, gem? No, that's a small word. Maybe some other word. One day I'll find out. You have opened our eyes. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Sushma Sala. Thank you very much, ma'am. And of course, Mr. Sudhir Rana, who did, speak about his own experience. We are sorry that you and your families have gone through this. There was no need, there was no justification. We express our solidarity with you and everybody who has to go through this. We now have much better understanding of the whole issue. We obviously thank His Excellency Sri Gitesh Sharma, High Commissioner of India, for his time and his words. Thank you very much for the organizing team, for the hard work. It has been difficult. We had a lot of hitches, but we have come around delivering this event. And of course, the collaboration which we all had. A special thanks to my co-anchor, Amit Jaron, Prashant Singh, Bimal Kaul, and Rakesh Ganju, and of course, Manu Sharma of IndoSay, for helping me link up with Aditya so that we can get all the phone numbers and everybody's numbers to contact them. Thank you very much, all the participants, for your time, interest, and participation. We are grateful to you. Friends, we hope to do more such collaborative events about India, about anything relevant to us as Bharat, as people from Bharat. हम भारत के हैं, भारत हमारा है. And with this, I say Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. Namaste. Thank you.